At my own graduation party, my parents didn't just ignore me, they made sure I vanished. They toasted my sister's brilliant legal mind, passed around a research article with her name on it that I had written, and sat me so close to the kitchen door I could smell the dishwater. But the worst part? Minutes before the champagne toast, I saw my father slip something into my glass. I smiled, swapped it with my sister's, and watched her raise it high. 10 minutes later, chaos erupted. How did I get here? And why would your own family try to destroy you on the night meant to celebrate you? Watch closely, because the answers aren't as simple as you think. And if you believe every person deserves to own their story, hit like, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe, because this is one you won't forget. I was standing in the gold-lit ballroom of the Grand Seaside Hotel, the Atlantic wind still clinging to my hair from the walk inside. The air smelled of roses and old money. I'd barely had time to take it in before Mr. Thomas's voice boomed over the microphone, announcing my sister as the pride of Newport, the next great attorney. Applause rolled through the crowd like thunder. My name wasn't called. Instead, my mother drifted toward me in her emerald gown, lips brushing my ear.
Smile.
Darling, even leeches can look graceful. Her perfume was sweet, but her words burned. She guided me to a table tucked beside the swinging kitchen doors, where servers in white jackets burst through with trays. I sat down, my back straight, a smile fixed on my face. From here, I could see every glittering guest, every clink of glass, and the clear divide between where they belonged and where I was placed. The applause for my sister lingered like the echo of a church bell, hanging heavy in the air. I clapped too, because everyone was watching, but my hands barely touched. The lights were warm and golden, yet a thin draft slipped along the floor and found my ankles. I could hear the server's hurried footsteps, the crash of plates stacked too high, a pot lid skittering across tile before someone caught it. My mother had chosen this seat for me. Not near the stage. Not near the center where our family always sat, but tucked far enough that I had to angle my body to see the podium at all. I kept my back straight, chin lifted just enough to meet any glance with the calm they expected, while each word from that introduction scraped like glass. The pride of Newport. The future of law. My sister basked in it, smiling as she accepted a crystal plaque with our name engraved in gold. Mr. Thomas moved on with the evening's program, his voice rolling through the ballroom. But I felt my mother's eyes before I saw her. She slipped into the empty chair beside me, emerald silk pooling like a wave. "Do you understand now?" she whispered. "Why I asked you to wear something understated tonight. We would not want you drawing the wrong kind of attention." I turned my head slowly, met her gaze.
What kind would that be?
Her smile widened just enough to cut. "Pity," she said, softer, or embarrassment. Her fingertips grazed my forearm in a show of affection, nails pressing just enough to sting. Then she rose and drifted back toward the head table, as if nothing had passed between us. Across the room, Evan was watching. His brow lifted a fraction, a question without words. A waiter set a flute of champagne in front of me, bubbles racing in tight streams. I left it untouched, fingers resting on the linen as if anchoring the table to the floor. My eyes followed my sister as she moved between guests, shaking hands, laughing, collecting compliments like favors owed. She tilted her head when she listened, laid a palm on a sleeve when she spoke. The choreography of belonging learned by heart. Every so often, a gaze snagged on me, held for a beat, then slipped away as if I were a stranger who had wandered in off the street. At the next table, two men from the yacht club leaned together, whispering behind their hands. I could not hear them, but I knew the script. The string quartet in the corner swelled into something soft and deliberate, and under it the clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation built a wall I was not meant to cross. I adjusted my chair by an inch so I could see the room cleanly, chandeliers scattering light into the glassware. My sister's smile reflected back a dozen times. At the far end, my father leaned toward a man in a navy suit, his hand resting on the man's shoulder in that practiced way of sealing a deal. He did not look at me once. A burst of laughter from the front turned every head. Madeline held up the article about the coastal law project, my project, waving it like a trophy. I recognized every sentence, every footnote. The hours spent combing maritime records and case law until my eyes burned. My name was nowhere. She passed the page to one of our professors, who patted her arm like a proud uncle while he read. The tablecloth under my palms felt thin as paper, but the edge cut into my fingers just the same. Evan's chair scraped softly as he slid closer. "Guess your name got lost," he murmured, not unkind. I let out a slow breath through my nose. "Names are replaceable," I said.
Proof is not.
A server brushed behind me, the swing doors flying wide long enough to wash me in heat and the smell of butter and garlic before the ballroom swallowed it again. The moment the doors thudded shut, the noise settled back into polite harmony. I straightened my silverware until the knife and fork lay perfectly parallel, hands steady, face composed. My sister laughed at something near the stage. A bright, clean sound that rose above the rest and vanished into the chandeliers. I did not touch my glass. I did not move toward the head table. I sat where they had placed me and felt the room try to place me too. The night was far from over, and so was I. The article made its way down the line of white linen tables like a prized relic. Each guest held it delicately, eyes scanning the bold headline before their faces lit up toward my sister. "Brilliant work, Madeline," someone said loud enough for me to hear. She tilted her head in that modest way she'd perfected, accepting the praise as if it belonged to her by birthright. My breath sat heavy in my chest. I could see the photo embedded in the center of the page, the coastal law project I had built from nothing, the case files I had spent months dissecting. The edges of the paper were smudged where my own fingers had touched it weeks ago. Now it might as well have been written in another language. My name had been erased. She reached my end of the table without looking at me, placing the article in front of our old professor from Providence. His eyes scanned the column, then his face broke into a proud smile. "You always had a gift for this kind of work, Madeline." She leaned in close to him, murmuring something that made him laugh, his hand resting warmly on hers. Evan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes met mine across the narrow space between us. No smirk this time, no teasing. Just a small shake of his head. I reached for the article, but Madeline's hand slid over it, holding it flat on the table as if to keep it from blowing away. "Careful," she said sweetly. "It's one of the only copies." I let go. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. A ripple of conversation pulled my attention to the head table where my father stood, refilling a guest's glass himself. The gesture looked generous, intimate, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. My mother caught him glancing in our direction and followed his gaze. She gave me that same practiced smile she'd worn when she told me to stay less visible. The message was clear: behave. Madeline moved on, the article tucked under her arm like a page from her own diary. I leaned back, letting the music from the quartet fill the silence between me and Evan. "It's not enough to take credit," he murmured without looking up. "They have to make sure you don't exist at all." My jaw tightened, but I kept my eyes on the champagne flute in front of me. The bubbles were smaller now, slower. "Let them," I said quietly. "The truth doesn't vanish just because someone hides it." From the stage, Mr. Thomas began announcing the next segment of the evening. My sister's name was called again, this time for a special recognition. She crossed the floor with the article still in her hand, as if it were a prop she couldn't perform without. Applause swelled, cameras flashed. I folded my napkin in half, pressing the crease with my fingertips until it was sharp enough to cut. My face didn't move, but inside, something shifted. I could feel the weight of that folded linen in my palm, small but deliberate, like the first stone in a wall I was building. This night wasn't theirs to write. Not entirely. The lights dimmed slightly as the first notes of a soft piano played through the speakers. All eyes turned toward the massive LED screen behind the stage. Mr. Thomas's voice carried over the room, warm and rehearsed. "And now a look back at the milestones that brought us here tonight." The first slide faded in, a smiling photo of my sister in her cap and gown from high school, her arms around my parents. I was there too, on the edge of the frame, but cropped cleanly out. The image shifted to another, our family at a charity gala. My shoulders still visible, my hand holding the auction paddle, but my face gone, replaced by a backdrop of soft blur. Each photo that followed was the same. The award ceremony, where I had been the one on stage, replaced by a shot of my sister shaking the dean's hand. The summer internship at the state capitol, the conference in Boston, the research trip to Nantucket, all of them reworked, reframed, or cut entirely. I could see where they'd spliced the footage, where the edges didn't quite match, but no one else seemed to notice. Laughter bubbled in pockets of the room as the images played, guests leaning toward each other to reminisce. My own memories unspooled silently, different versions from the ones on display. Evan shifted in his seat beside me. I didn't look at him, but I could feel his glance, like a question he already knew the answer to. On the screen, a clip rolled of my sister at the podium during what was supposed to be my presentation in our final seminar. She was speaking words I had written, her voice smooth and confident. The camera panned a room, catching the faculty nodding, smiling, clapping. My name was nowhere. When the video ended, applause filled the ballroom. Mr. Thomas invited everyone to raise a glass to the extraordinary accomplishments of the Bennett family. My sister took a shallow bow, cheeks flushed in the glow of the stage lights. My parents beamed, the picture of proud success. I kept my glass on the table, my fingers resting lightly on the stem but not lifting it. Across the room, Aunt Helen's eyes met mine. She didn't smile. Instead, she gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, before turning back to the people beside her. It was enough to steady me. The applause faded, the lights came back up, and servers began moving between tables again. Plates clinked, chairs shifted, conversations resumed. I unfolded my napkin, smoothing it across my lap, the fabric cool under my palms. My face stayed calm, my breathing even, but each image from the slideshow was etched sharp in my mind. Not one of them was the truth, but all of them had just been cemented in the memories of everyone in this room. I let my fingers curl loosely around the base of my untouched champagne, feeling the chill creep into my skin. The night was still unfolding, and the part they hadn't scripted was yet to come. My father rose from his seat like a man stepping into a spotlight he'd been waiting for all night. The murmur in the ballroom softened, the string quartet's notes fading to a hum. He took the microphone for Mr. Thomas with the easy confidence of someone who had owned every room he'd ever walked into. His voice was rich, carrying to the far corners without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight is not only a celebration of my eldest daughter's brilliance, but a testament to the sacrifices our family has made to get here." I knew what was coming before the words left his mouth. He let the pause stretch, scanning the crowd as though weighing whether to share something deeply personal. "There was a time," he continued, "when the weight of tuition, of opportunity, seemed impossible to bear. But we did it. We covered more than $40,000 in tuition costs to make sure Claire had her shot." A few guests gasped softly. Others nodded in solemn admiration. The way he said it, you'd think I had been plucked from the brink of ruin by his generosity. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk napkin, her face the picture of maternal pride. At the table beside me, two women whispered about how lucky I was. The champagne flute in front of me caught the chandelier's light, gold ripples dancing against the glass. I didn't touch it. My hand instead slid into my clutch, fingers brushing the thick envelope Aunt Helen had slipped to me earlier. Inside was the letter awarding me a full scholarship, every semester paid in full, along with the receipts for the extra classes and summer programs I'd covered myself. My father went on, weaving stories about late nights he spent helping me study, about covering rent when I fell short. Each sentence drew another murmur of approval from the guests. My sister stood nearby, smiling as if she were part of this noble struggle. I kept my face still, eyes on him, letting the words roll over me without flinching. When he finally raised his glass, the room followed. Crystal chimed in unison, a shimmering chorus of loyalty. I didn't lift mine. Across the table, Evan's eyes flicked to my unmoving hand, then back to my father. He said nothing, but I could feel the tension in the air between us, like a thread pulled tight. My father sipped, savoring the moment before stepping down to embrace my sister. Cameras flashed, catching their smiles. The framed picture of a perfect family. I stayed in my seat, the envelope in my clutch pressing against my palm like a hidden weight. Outside, I could hear the faint crash of waves against the seawall, steady and certain, drowning out the echo of applause still ringing in the room. I slipped away from the table under the cover of polite applause, weaving between chairs toward the dessert buffet along the far wall. The scent of chocolate ganache and fresh berries floated up to meet me, rich and sweet, almost masking the tension that clung to my skin. Servers moved in swift lines, replenishing trays, their white gloves flashing under the lights. I reached for a small plate, more to keep my hands busy than from any appetite. Before I could lift the silver tongs, a familiar voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Enjoying yourself?" My mother's reflection appeared in the polished lid of the pastry case before she stepped into view. Her smile was perfect, her tone warm enough for anyone watching, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. I set the plate down. "It's been enlightening," I said, my voice even. She moved closer, the emerald silk of her gown whispering against the floor. "I want you to understand something," she said quietly, leaning just close enough that no one else could hear. "This evening is about celebration, not disruption. Whatever feelings you're harboring, you will keep them to yourself." Her hand rested on my forearm, light but firm, like the way you'd hold a child who might bolt. I met her gaze. And what if the truth itself causes a disruption? Her fingers tightened, then released, as if she'd touched something too hot. "Then you should remember whose name is on the invitation," she said, straightening, her smile widening for the benefit of a passing couple. From across the room, Evan caught my eye. He was standing near the double doors leading to a side hallway, one hand in his pocket, the other giving the smallest of gestures, two fingers tapping his glass, then pointing toward the doors. My mother turned to follow my gaze, but he had already looked away, engaged in polite conversation with a man in a navy suit. "I'm serious, Claire," she murmured, her voice dropping again. "Do not embarrass this family tonight." I let a faint smile curl my lips. "A scene," I said, reaching for a fork on the table beside me, "is just truth with better lighting." Her expression faltered. A flicker so fast it might have been imagined, then she turned and glided back into the crowd. I set the untouched dessert plate on the nearest tray and crossed the room without hurry, slipping through the open doors Evan had indicated. The sound of the ballroom dimmed instantly, replaced by the muffled thud of the quartet's music through the wall and the faint echo of footsteps ahead. The hallway smelled faintly of furniture polish and sea air. Evan was waiting halfway down, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked on mine. Without a word, he tilted his head toward a closed door at the end of the corridor. The faint murmur of voices leaked through, low and deliberate. I felt my pulse quicken, the air thickening around us. Whatever was behind that door wasn't meant for me to hear, and that was exactly why I needed to. Evan pressed his ear to the crack between the door and its frame, motioning for me to join him. The voices inside were muted but distinct, like the low rumble of a storm over the ocean. I stepped closer, holding my breath so the sound of it wouldn't drown their words. "Make sure it's her glass," my father's voice said, calm and deliberate. "No mistakes this time." Victoria's reply came softer, but edged like broken glass. "It'll just make her lightheaded, enough to keep her quiet. Nothing dangerous, as long as she doesn't embarrass us again." I could picture them perfectly, my father leaning forward, elbows on his knees, speaking as though he were arranging flowers rather than orchestrating a quiet ruin. The faint clink of glass reached us, followed by the scrape of a chair. "And the timing?" another voice asked. "Mr. Thomas. During the toast. Everyone will be watching. If she wobbles a little, they'll just think she's had too much champagne." Evan's phone was already in his hand, camera recording without the flash. The tiny red dot pulsed in the dark like a heartbeat. My nails dug lightly into my palm, the sharp sting anchoring me in place. "Good," my father said after a pause. After tonight, she won't be in any position to challenge what we've built. There was a shuffle of movement, the sound of fabric against fabric, and the dull thud of something small set on a table. Victoria's tone shifted to syrupy concern. I still wish you'd let me handle it another way. Too late for that, my father replied. The muffled ring of a phone cut through their words. Mr. Thomas excused himself, footsteps moving toward the far side of the room. Evan stepped back from the door, his face pale under the dim hallway light. I stayed where I was, my hand resting lightly on the brass doorknob. Not to open it, but to feel the cold weight of it against my skin. Inside, chairs scraped again. Just remember, my father said, this is for her own good. For ours, Victoria corrected. Their voices grew fainter, moving deeper into the room. I let go of the knob and turned to Evan. He slipped the phone back into his jacket, zipping the pocket closed. You got enough? I asked. He nodded once, sharp. We didn't speak as we walked back down the hallway. The music from the ballroom grew louder with each step, mingling with the low murmur of the crowd. At the threshold, Evan stopped, his hand brushing my arm. Whatever you're planning, he said quietly, make sure you walk away with more than just your pride. I didn't answer. Pride was the only thing I had left, and after tonight, I intended to keep it intact. I stepped through the open doors, the bright light swallowing me whole, carrying with it the weight of what I'd just heard. Aunt Helen found me before I even reached my table. She moved quickly, her heels silent against the marble, slipping into step beside me as if she'd just happened to cross my path. In her hand was a small black envelope, the kind used for private contracts, no names written on it. She pressed it into my palm without a word, her fingers curling over mine for a brief second before pulling away. I could feel the weight of it, heavier than paper should be. Read it when you're alone, she said under her breath, her gaze fixed on the stage as if she hadn't spoken to me at all. Then she was gone, absorbed back into the sea of sequins and champagne flutes. I slid the envelope into my clutch, my fingers brushing the smooth leather where Evan's recording now rested. It was like carrying two loaded weapons in plain sight, and no one knew. Across the room, Madeline was laughing with Dean Harris, holding a neatly wrapped box in gold paper. She made a little show of handing it to him, and when he peeled back the lid, I saw it, an antique law volume I'd spent months tracking down for his retirement gift last year. My name had been on the card then. Now there was no card. Dean's eyes lit up, his voice warm with gratitude. You always think of the perfect thing, he told her, pulling her into an embrace. She basked in it, her smile wide and untroubled, the room none the wiser. I stood still, the chatter and music pressing against me like water rising in a glass. My hand stayed on the clutch, feeling the layered edges of the envelope and the cold rectangle of the phone. I imagined the look on my father's face when the right moment came, the ripple through the crowd, the air cracking like ice underfoot. Timing was everything. From my place at the edge of the crowd, I could see my father at the bar, gesturing toward my untouched champagne flute on the table. The bartender nodded, reaching for the bottle, and in that instant, I knew the game was about to move into its final act. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile they'd taught me to use at charity dinners, polished, harmless. Inside, every muscle was coiled. The pieces were sliding into place, and I wasn't just part of the picture anymore. I was holding the frame. The clinking of glasses rippled through the ballroom as Mr. Thomas called for everyone's attention. My father stood at the center, his arm draped casually around Madeline, a picture of paternal pride. A fresh bottle of champagne rested in the crook of his other arm. He filled my glass last, his hand steady, his eyes meeting mine for only a fraction of a second. Then, as he turned away, I saw it, the subtle drop of something small, quick, and deliberate into the pale gold liquid. The room was too loud for anyone else to notice. I lifted the flute, the bubbles rising against the curve of the glass. My lips curled just enough to pass for a smile as I stepped toward my sister. She was still laughing with Dean Harris, her own glass halfway full. I let my shoulder brush hers, murmuring something about the view from the balcony, and in that easy motion, I switched our glasses. She didn't even glance down before lifting it in thanks. Mr. Thomas began his toast, words about family, legacy, and honor washing over the crowd. All around us, crystal chimed. I touched my glass to Evans, the faintest tap, my eyes never leaving Madeline. She tilted the drink back, the golden liquid catching the light before disappearing past her lips. It didn't take long. The first sign was a faint flutter in her eyelids, a pause in her sentence. She swayed slightly, one hand brushing the back of a chair for balance. Dean's smile faltered. Then, as the applause swelled at the end of the toast, her knees buckled. The crash of her glass shattering on the marble cut through the room, followed by gasps and the scrape of chairs. Several guests rushed forward, voices rising in confusion. Someone called for a doctor. My father was there in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, his face the perfect mask of concern. My mother hovered close, issuing orders to the staff. I stood a few feet back, my glass untouched in my hand, watching the scene with a calm that felt almost unnatural. Evan slipped up beside me, his voice low.
Now?
I didn't look at him when I answered.
Now.
The chaos around Madeline was the perfect cover. While my parents bent low over her, their voices tight with manufactured panic, I walked toward the AV booth at the back of the room. Evan was already there, slipping the USB from his jacket and into the trembling hands of the technician. "Play it," I said, my tone leaving no room for hesitation. The screen behind the stage flickered once, twice, and then the room fell into an unnatural hush as my father's voice filled the air. "Make sure it's her glass." No mistakes this time. Gasps cut through the crowd. My mother's sharp reply followed, dripping from the speakers like venom. The words hung there, impossible to misinterpret. Every head in the room turned toward them. I stepped forward, the weight of the clutch in my hand. "Since we're sharing sacrifices tonight," I said, pulling out the scholarship letter and holding it high, "here's the truth about who paid for my education." Aunt Helen emerged from the crowd, placing a second folder into my hand, photocopies of receipts, records, the kind of proof that didn't flinch under scrutiny. I laid them on the nearest table for anyone to see. Uniformed officers appeared at the entrance, their presence pulling the tension taut. My father straightened, but the charm he wore so easily had already cracked. My mother's lips moved, but no sound came out. Evan stood near the booth, arms crossed, the recording still looping softly over the speakers. I reached into my clutch one last time and placed my family's heirloom bracelet on the table beside the papers, its gold catching the light. Then I slid the keys to the Bennett estate beside it. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. I took one last look at the faces that had written me out of my own story and let the silence hold them there. "And this door," I added quietly, "will never open for you again." Without looking back, I walked through the parting crowd, past the open doors, and into the cool night air. The sound of the ocean met me like an old friend, steady, unshakable. Somewhere behind me, the recording played on, my father's voice repeating the words that had ended their story, and let me start my own.